Okay, and I'm John Tyner, President of the Public Affairs Forum until impeached. But until that time, I'm going to give the information that we meet from 11:45 to 1 p.m. at the Old Spaghetti Factory, and that's at 18925 Northwest Tanniscorn Drive. That's across from the Evergreen movie Theaters in Hillsborough. Doors open at 10:30, first lunch at 11:30, and the second one at noon. The program begins at noon. And I just note that it was founded in 1956. It's a continuing instrument of public information, and it's one of the few traditions of long standing we have in Washington County. And basically it's set up an interchange of ideas and stimulate thinking on civic matters. And that's our theme. We're going to have the folks on the Oregon Cannabis Act, and that's Measure 80. And we're going to have Roy Kaufman, who is the Public Information Director for the campaign, and Sheriff Pat Garrett, who is speaking against it. And he's also going to put in a little plug for the ballot measure supporting the enhanced sheriff's patrol districts in Washington County. We are going to have, if they ever show up, the candidates for House District 31. Right now, Brad Witt isn't here, Lou Barnes is. And we're going to have House District 32, which is Cannon Beach and Washington County. Representative Deborah Boone is here, but I haven't seen Jim Welsh or Perry Roll. So what we're probably going to do is we're going to have the initiative speakers have 8 to 10 minutes and questioning. What we're probably going to do is expand the question period for the initiative and allow each of the candidates who are here in their House districts to speak and then entertain questions. So at this point in time, I would call Roy Kaufman, allow him to introduce himself so I don't use his time in a non-productive manner. He is a proponent of the initiative. And come on up, sir, and make your presentation.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, maybe a little too well. My name is Roy Kaufman. I'm with the Yes on Measure 80 campaign. Very grateful to be here today to talk to you about this issue. Obviously, ballots received at millions of households across Oregon over the weekend, and that's very exciting. It means we're 15 days away from learning where Oregonians are on this issue as well as other issues. Before I get started and talk about Measure 80 and why I think it's an important opportunity for Oregonians as well as for Americans, I thought it would be useful to share a little bit of historical context. So, in 1932, Oregon voters approved Measure 7. Measure 7, almost 60% of Oregon voters supported it, repealed alcohol prohibition at the state level. That was November 1932. If your history lessons are still with you, federal prohibition wasn't repealed until 1933 with the 21st Amendment. Oregon and Colorado were the two states in the Union that said, even though federal prohibition is still in place, we believe prohibition of alcohol has failed. We were one of the first states, Oregon was one of the first states to move forward with the temperance movement to prohibit liquor, and it was the first state, along with Colorado, to repeal alcohol prohibition because, simply put, Oregonians saw that while prohibition may have had the best of intentions, it was an utter and complete failure. It did two things. It created a very strong black market that allowed criminals to prosper, and we saw the rise of organized crime through alcohol prohibition. And the second thing it did is it turned average Oregonians into criminals because they chose to consume liquor or they chose to produce liquor illegally. And so what you had was the overwhelming majority of the population suffering because a bad policy was kept in place for too long. And then, finally, a majority of Oregonians and then a majority of Americans realized prohibiting alcohol was being counterproductive. If we really wanted to control the alcohol market, we needed to have it legal, regulated, and taxed. And fast forward to today, Oregon's beer and wine industries, two of our flagship industries in the state, are $5 billion a year combined industries. They employ tens of thousands of people in our state. They are heavily regulated. They are heavily taxed. We have a combination of enforcement and education and regulation that makes sure that Youth are not getting access to liquor because they have to show ID. We have educated store owners. We've educated people in our community. We've done all of this while maintaining alcohol as a legal but highly regulated market. Why do I open with that? Because where we are today with marijuana prohibition is where we were in 1932 with liquor prohibition. Simply put, the prohibition of marijuana has not worked and it will not work because it is a huge, huge market. It is Oregon's biggest cash crop every year, bigger than wheat, bigger than grass seed, bigger than Christmas trees. And it is completely untaxed and completely unregulated. And we are foregoing a significant amount of tax revenue and a significant amount of responsibility as adults in our community to regulate a marketplace that is not going anywhere. So we look at alcohol prohibition and how it's failed, and alcohol regulation and how it's been successful, and we have to look at the equation we have right now for marijuana prohibition and say, marijuana prohibition has failed on every single level. Every level that marijuana prohibition was supposed to have been successful in reducing the demand, in reducing supply, in making our communities safer, in saving us money, has failed. Marijuana prohibition has cost our nation trillions of dollars. It has cost our state hundreds of millions of dollars. It costs our state $60 million in public safety costs every single year. Police, courtroom, corrections, jail costs. So prohibition does not work, but the model of regulation does work. Because when you take a product that is prohibited and you make it legal and regulated, you do two things. One, you make it a whole lot less attractive and a whole lot less sexy to people that shouldn't be engaging in that market. And I'm talking specifically about kids. As a parent, I have 3 small kids of my own. I know the best thing that I can do if I want them to not brush their teeth is to prohibit toothbrushes in my house. Because the absolute most effective way to get them to focus on brushing their teeth is to tell them they're not allowed to do it. But when we regulate something, then we say, let's look at the market. Let's look at how people are interacting with the market. Let's look at the opportunity to raise some revenues for our schools and for our social services. Let's look at a way to focus on the public safety issues that matter most. And let's look at the models we have in place for the regulation of liquor, for example, where we have a statewide industry commission. We have a state licensed regulatory framework. We have political appointments, we have legislative input, and we have voter input. And when we do that, we look at liquor and we say, Oregon regulates liquor effectively. It keeps it out of the hands of youth much more effectively than prohibition has or would have, much more effectively than we're able to keep marijuana out of the hands of youth. Right now, according to a Monitoring the Future study, 8 out of 10 American youth say it's easy for them to get marijuana. 8 out of 10. If we even look at the most impacted counties in Oregon that are struggling with the issue of youth drinking or teen binge drinking, we see, for example, in Clatsop County, a 30% binge drinking rate. That means that our worst, most challenged county under regulation is still almost 3 times better at regulating the market than prohibition of marijuana is. 3 times more effective. So what we're saying is, let's look at the regulatory framework we have for liquor, let's look at the existing framework we have for marijuana, and let's regulate it responsibly. Let's leverage the tax, let's leverage the revenue, and let's make sure that we understand politically that this is an issue. If you are on the conservative side of the spectrum, this is an issue of civil liberties and civil rights. This is an issue of states' rights. That's why Governor Gary Johnson, the Libertarian presidential candidate, has endorsed Measure 80. It is why a Republican candidate for state Senate has endorsed Measure 80. If you are on the left side of the spectrum, this is an issue of civil rights and civil justice. Because if you want to look at the biggest determinant of why people of color are in prison, it is for marijuana possession and drug-related nonviolent offenses. If we want to be a more equitable, civil rights-focused society. We have to tackle the war on drugs, and the most effective way is to regulate and tax marijuana for adults 21 and over, and that's exactly what Measure 80 does. And that's why people like Jill Stein, who's the Green Party presidential candidate, have personally endorsed Measure 80 as well. And you don't have to be on the Libertarian or the Green side. If you're in the middle of the spectrum, if you're a Democrat or Republican, people like former Secretary of State Bill Bradbury have endorsed Measure 80 because they recognize what we are doing simply does not work. So I would ask you to take a look at Measure 80, read through the voter pamphlet statements, read through the arguments and explanation, visit out the website vote80.org, study the issue, because we have an opportunity to join with our state to the north, Washington State, that is on the brink of legalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana, to join with our fellow state Colorado and their Amendment 64, which is on the brink of legalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana, and to be able to show the federal government and the nation there is a more sensible, more effective, more pragmatic way to address the issue of marijuana in the United States. And Oregon, just like we've done countless times before with the bottle bill, with urban growth planning, with transit planning, with the beach bill, with death with dignity, over and over again, Oregon voters have shown that we have pragmatic approaches to challenging solutions, and this is one more pragmatic way. So please, I ask you to support Measure 80. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Sheriff Pat Garrett. The Oregon Cannabis Tax Act is remarkable in its glowing advocacy of all things pot. I invite you, if you remember nothing from my remarks today, read the entire measure. I provided it to you on your table. Pot is described in the measure as, quote, relatively non-addictive. However, the Oregon Department of Health's Addictions and Mental Health Division report that since 2008, marijuana has been the #1 drug for which addiction treatment is sought in Oregon. Prior to that, pot had been #2 behind meth going back to the year 2000. The measure also describes pot as a, quote, comparatively harmless euphoriant. The basic drug in pot that causes impairment is commonly known as THC. In the 70s, the THC content in marijuana was typically around 2%. Today, it commonly exceeds 20%, particularly in Oregon. As to whether it's comparatively harmless, research clearly shows that marijuana use is linked to lower academic performance. It causes problems with critical skills related to attention, memory, and learning, not to mention absence from school. A study by Columbia University's National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse found that youth aged 12 to 17 who smoke pot are 85 times more likely to use cocaine. Measure 80 will increase the availability of pot for our youth, and we know that increased availability leads to increased use. Our governor has a plan to increase high school graduation rates to 100%. Measure 80 directly contradicts that goal. Our national experience with alcohol and tobacco shows that for every dollar gained in taxes, we spend 10 on social costs. Taxes on pot sales would never pay for the increased social costs that would result from more users. There are costs associated with policing, with public health, and that impact lives. For example, Montana authorities report that for the years 2007-2008, 43% of all drunk driving cases in their state involved THC, and that THC content was found to be the contributing factor in 62 fatalities. Our experience with even tightly controlled prescription drugs like OxyContin show that legalizing drugs widens availability and misuse, even when controls are in place. Proponents say Measure 80 will stop wasteful use of police resources, court, and incarceration. The fact is, Oregon decriminalized pot possession of less than an ounce 40 years ago. The Oregon Department of Corrections recently reported that of the 15,000 inmates in prison across this state, only 10 are there for marijuana possession charges. Of the 10 out of 15,000, 4 were remanded for failing post-prison supervision. Almost all of the 10 were plead downs from either manufacturing or delivery of a controlled substance and had extensive criminal history. And let's look at jails. If you survey jails across Oregon, which we recently did, it revealed that of 8,200 jail beds, less than 2%
are occupied by inmates with marijuana-related charges. That's not only just possession, but delivery and trafficking sales as well. Contrary to what some want you to believe, Oregon law enforcement does not spend excessive resources on marijuana-related crime. The fact is, if Measure 80 passes, law enforcement costs will increase. One example is the investigation of impaired driving related to marijuana because there is simply no court-recognized test to detect marijuana impairment as there is presently for alcohol. THC is fat-soluble, meaning it shows up in urine weeks after use. Drugged driving investigations require specially trained police officers to investigate. Many times, we call them in on overtime, adding significant cost. Case law developed over many years has made these investigations layered with very specific steps and processes. Such investigations can take half to an entire shift. Legalizing pot without prior development of a court-recognized test for pot impairment will add significant costs to law enforcement and courts. Last year, Sheriff's Office deputies in Washington County arrested over 1,200 impaired drivers. No small problem. Measure 80 will put federal grants in great jeopardy. Just like federal highway money is tied to requirements like keeping DUI limits at or below 0.08% blood alcohol content, there are many millions of federal grants under programs like the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that would be at risk if Measure 80 passes, because Oregon would be at complete odds with federal law. Legalizing marijuana will not do away with the illegal black market sales for two main reasons. First, most drug trafficking organizations are polydrug. Like any good business, they diversify. Two, the marijuana black market will continue because it will produce pot at an equal or superior quality as the government taxed product and at a lower price to the consumer. Colorado serves as a useful example. As reported by NPR in 2010, the black market sold pot at less than half the price provided by the booming dispensary industry. Measure 80 places no limits on how much marijuana can be possessed. So Measure 80 literally blows the doors off any controls with respect to the quantity of marijuana that we would find in our communities. This fact further increases availability, use by kids, and the black market. And no limits is primarily why the big pro-pot money has bypassed Oregon and instead focusing on Washington especially and Colorado. Measure 80 will grow a new state bureaucracy in the Oregon Cannabis Commission. After the first year, that five of 7 commissioners will be selected by growers and processors, not by the governor as in the case of the OLCC. The Cannabis Commission, controlled by pot growers and processors, will make rules and regulations to implement the measure, to preside over the commission's jurisdiction of all who grow, process, package, transport, stock, conduct sales, and handle the money of something that will continue to be federally illegal. Marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance, and Measure 80 will not change the fact that pot cultivation and distribution will continue to be subject to federal prosecution. This fact will discourage many from signing up with the commission and will further encourage people to grow and deal in the black market. Measure 80 states that money left over from, after the commission's cut to fund their bureaucracy will be distributed in several specific ways. School districts shall get 1% to, among other things, persuade students to decline to consume psychoactive substances by providing them with accurate information about the threat these drugs pose to their mental and physical development. To conclude, more marijuana users means more addiction. 1 in 11 people who use marijuana become dependent. If one starts in adolescence, that number jumps to 1 in 6. If you care about educational outcomes, then you need to oppose Measure 80 because it directly affects learning, memory, and dropout rates. If you care about Oregon's share of federal grant money, you need to oppose Measure 80 because it will jeopardize our ability to get federal funds. If you care about our economic competitiveness, you will oppose Measure 80 because employers will not hire those who test positive for drug use. If you care about safe roads, you will oppose Measure 80 because marijuana use doubles the user's risk of being involved in a traffic crash. If you are concerned about social costs that will outpace any revenue, then you will oppose Measure 80. Finally, if you care about responsible, accountable government, you will oppose Measure 80 because of the questionable composition of the proposed Oregon Cannabis Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go any further, is we're going to see if we can expand the questioning. If there's not a contested legislative thing, we'll just move the questioning, expand the question period, and then let the candidates are who here speak as long as they want to within their time frame. Is Mr. Miller here? How about Representative Witt? Well, that being it, we're going to expand the questioning period. So queue up here and start throwing the questions at these gentlemen. If they sit up here, they can probably get to the microphone quicker. We're going to have the forum's charm offensive here, in which, in succinct and germane terms, we're going to deal with questions and respectful responses. Thank you.
For a member, it has been said that the use of marijuana leads to the use of the harder drugs, not to mention more expensive. What are your views on that?
Thank you for the question. So the question basically points to the gateway drug myth that has been around for a long time. I'll answer it not in my own words, but in the words of the National Academy of Sciences Institutes of Health. The National Institute of Health released a report that said conclusively, marijuana is not a gateway drug because of its physical effects. It is a gateway drug because it is a black market that operates the marijuana industry. What that means is this. When you go right now, if you are somebody who is seeking marijuana, you would likely go to a dealer who is trying to push other drugs that dealer has, especially if you are a young person and you shouldn't be interacting with these drugs at all, but you are operating in the black market. The dealer has the incentive to use your interest in getting marijuana to push harder drugs. The problem is, because we have a black market, we have a gateway effect. When we regulate marijuana, when we do what we did with it with liquor, which is put it in stores, force store owners to ask for ID, put strict penalties, civil and criminal penalties for provision of liquor to minors. We do the same thing with marijuana, and that's exactly what Measure 80 would do. Would put it in stores, would make it a 21 and above market, would force store owners to ask for ID. You remove the gateway effect because you remove the black market that marijuana is operating in. Does that help answer the question? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It is true that marijuana use is correlated with use of other drugs. And really the hypothesis comes down to one of two. They're relatively debatable in the literature. Does someone tend to use other drugs because they use marijuana, or do they seek out experimentation and use of other kinds of drugs, apart from the impacts of marijuana? The fact is that it is correlated with using additional drugs. I'll leave it at that.
Chris Leslie, former member. The idea of students or teenagers smoking dope, to me, means that they're going to sit in a classroom and just nod off, and that's never been a good idea. And it goes along with the recent study I saw about Alzheimer's is been correlated with marijuana use. Comments?
Yep. Yeah. So thank you for the question. So first I'll say our chief petitioner, Paul Stanford, and our co-chief petitioner, Bill Appel, are both here in the room. They're sitting at the table and to the right of the microphone. So after the forum is over, if you have more specific questions, especially around medical marijuana and the construction of the Measure 80 language, I would definitely ask you to touch in with Paul or Bill. To answer your question, the problem exactly is that more youth have access to marijuana than they have access to liquor or tobacco. It is harder for a person under the age of 21 to get a bottle of booze or to get their hands on a pack of cigarettes than it is for them to get their hands on marijuana, because we have abdicated our responsibility to regulate an existing market. It is, no pun intended, a pipe dream to think that marijuana as an industry, that marijuana as a market is going to disappear ever. The only responsible approach, and we've heard this from former law enforcement, we've heard this from clergy, we've heard this from educators, the only responsible approach is to regulate the market. So what we're doing with youth is we say, right now, 8 out of 10 kids, the kids that you're talking about that are getting marijuana and nodding off in class, 8 out of 10 kids say it is easy for them to get marijuana, easier than it is to get liquor, easier than it is to get tobacco. If we really want to crack down on the youth access to marijuana, we need to do with it what we've done with liquor over the past 40 years. We regulate it, we create a 21 and above age limit, we put it behind the counters, we force for the asking of identification. We create an education campaign, the same way that we have with liquor, that says liquor is not for youth. Here are all the dangers of using alcohol. When you are an adult of 21 or above years, then you may be able to make the decision of whether you want to consume alcohol. But right now we are abdicating the responsibility to regulate marijuana because we continue to treat it as a black market. Jeff?
Thank you. As I said earlier, 1 in 6 youth who try marijuana will become dependent upon it, and I think it absolutely is in direct conflict with academic achievement. And I would say, if you know a teacher, ask a teacher. I mean, that's where they would know best. The second part to that answer, it is incredibly bold to say, in my opinion, that because kids have so much access to marijuana now, we need to pass Measure 80. Mr. Stanford's here. He's the author of Measure 80. He was also the author of the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act, principally. And the reason that we have such abundance of marijuana today is because of the plethora of marijuana that has flooded our communities as a result of the act. Measure 80 has very little, if any, controls. If you look north to the state of Washington, that has a prayer of passing, principally because there are controls in place that are not available with Measure 80. Thank you.
I'm Al Falcone, forum member. Both gentlemen, I certainly appreciate the presentation. Last evening I saw a piece on 60 Minutes that pertained to marijuana, and I was wondering if this might be a question that you might be able to comment on. Pertaining to medical marijuana, if someone was leaving a state and they had a card for the use of medical marijuana and they went through security, that should not be a problem in that state. If they were visiting somebody out of state and it wasn't legalized here, would they have a problem going back through security on the way home?
Yeah. For that question, I'm actually going to ask, if that's all right with the forum host, I'm going to ask Paul Stanford, who's an expert on the issue of medical marijuana laws in different states, to take it from the floor. Is that okay, Paul?
Okay. I think we have some flexibility. Would you like to take it from the floor or from a microphone?
Sure, I can take it from here. Medical marijuana permit is only good in 5 other states in the District of Columbia. There are 17 states and the District of Columbia, quite ironically, that allow medical marijuana. And 5 states have reciprocity. Oregon does not grant reciprocity to out-of-state patients, but out-of-state patients uniquely can get a medical marijuana card here in Oregon because of a Supreme Court ruling. But the point is, you're only legal in Michigan, Maine, Montana, Rhode Island, Arizona, and the District of Columbia. At the airport here in Portland, they allow patients with a card to fly out with medical marijuana, but it wouldn't be legal in any other state except those 5 and the District of Columbia.
Thank you, Paul.
The viewers, I would explain that gap in coverage is due to the fact that Dick was taken from the floor. So that was actually Paul Stanford, one of the proponents of the issue, explaining the legal status of marijuana laws in other states.
Garrett, forum member. I'm a little confused with the terms decriminalization of marijuana, legalization of marijuana. My main question is, if the measure passes, and Pat, you referred to the new commission regulating except the producers, people, the industry regulating themselves rather than the governor appointing people who are going to regulate. Is this a measure, if the Measure 80 does pass, is this something that the legislature could fix?
Yeah.
For example, Tom Riley with Measure 47.
I'll jump in. Okay. All right, thank you for the question. So there's a couple things to unpack there. We'll start with the last part first. Measure 80 is a statutory measure. What that means is when the voters of Oregon pass Measure 80 on November 6th, the legislature can immediately, in the next session, put in pieces, new legislation, new bills. We've already had conversations with a number of legislators that are looking at pieces of legislation they would bring forward to address the kinds of questions that would come up in the creation of a new OLCC-style commission. To clarify also about the commission, I think this is an important point. One, in the first year, the governor appoints all the members of the commission. So Governor Kitzhaber appoints all members of the commission in the first year. Going forward after the first year, the opportunity is for license holders, Oregon Cannabis Commission license holders, to vote to elect members of the commission. And rather than look at the language we have in place right now around the medical marijuana program in Oregon, where we call people growers or providers or patients, what we really need to do is look at this the same way we look at the wine industry in Oregon, which is to say we have vintners, we have grape growers, we have winemakers, we have bottlers, we have producers, distributors, marketing firms. There's an entire ecosystem that operates around Oregon's $2.5 billion a year wine industry. And those are the kinds of businesses, focused and ancillary businesses, that would be the kinds of recipients of licenses from the Oregon Cannabis Commission. So when we say that a license holder would vote to elect a member of a commission, what we're saying is if you are a farmer of marijuana, if you are a producer of a marijuana product, if you are a producer of a hemp product or a hemp farmer, because we haven't even talked about hemp, which is frankly the much bigger economic opportunity for Oregon's rural counties especially. But wherever you are in the ecosystem of this new industry, you will need to be a license holder, and you will be part of the group that elects the members of this commission, which is a much broader way than looking at it narrowly through the medical marijuana lens. Sheriff?
The risk I think the structure provides is that, clearly the first year, Mr. Kaufman's absolutely right. The governor appoints all commissioners. Those of us who have been in the administrative rulemaking world or know how quickly things get done in Salem, no offense there, Representative Boone, we know that's asking a lot for Measure 80 folks to say, look, if there's any problems with the measure after it's passed, the legislature will take care of it. Our year one commission members are going to make rules. That I think is pretty unrealistic. You're going to get what you get with Measure 80. With respect to hemp, I have no qualms whatsoever. I think we should grow hemp until the sun goes down. If you smoke hemp, all you're going to encourage is heart and cardiovascular disease like you do cigarettes. So it is an economic opportunity. I think that's a red herring in Measure 80. Measure 80 is not about hemp. It's not even about wine or blueberries or filberts. It's about a Schedule I drug that would be at the commission that generally controls how that is processed, packaged, sold, managed, would be out of the governor's hands, as in the case of the OLCC, and in the hands of those who would benefit directly from its sale and use.
Kathy Stanton, board member, maybe we should not have dropped this at the table. Section 474.075, disposition of license fees and profits. You said 1% to the schools, but that is...
Actually, Sheriff's had one.
Oh, okay.
I said one.
Thank you. Because, and it's not even that, Sheriff, because all the monies from the sale, so the treasurer reimburses the commission for the cost of buying purchasing processing, reimburses Attorney General to uphold the measure only, and to reimburse the OCC contractors for their expenses and labor with a 15% of gross sales. So my questions to both of you are talking about its relation to alcohol. This is more like the lottery, when you're going to do 50% gross sales to contractors, and only after that does all the divisions take place. So in no way should anybody think that 1% of sales is going to go to schools.
Thank you, Counselor. That's an important point. It will, in my opinion, Measure 80 is going to enrich some people who are in the production business of marijuana. And then just another word with respect to law enforcement in Oregon. 36 sheriffs, 192 police chiefs, well over 100 judges. I'll be corrected if I go astray here. I do not believe any one of those officials are backing Measure 80.
So thank you for the question as well. I think what's important to look at is the distribution of the tax revenue. And that's what we're talking about when we say tax revenue, the revenue collected from the state sales, the taxed state sales of marijuana through these state licensed marijuana shops. 90% of that revenue, 90% goes to the general fund, which we know more than half the general fund is K through 12 and higher ed spending in Oregon. A good portion of the general fund is also social services. 7% of the tax revenue from the state licensed sale of marijuana to adults 21 and over goes towards funding existing drug treatment programs, because we know there are people who will always abuse products, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or prescription medicine or illegal drugs. Those programs are very, very hard hit in this economy. So 7% of the tax revenue goes towards drug treatment funding. There are a lot of ways to look at this measure. The argument we always hear from opponents is, well, we don't like the way the measure is written. We don't think it's perfect. I've been a voter for about 15 years. I can tell you I've never seen a perfect ballot measure or a perfect candidate, but I can tell you what I've seen with the existing approach of prohibition. Utter and complete failure, utter and complete waste of money. What we are doing simply does not work. When a commission, a global commission on the drug war, releases a report that is signed by presidents of nations, by former secretaries of state of the United States, by former congressmen, by billionaire executives like Richard Branson, by leading thinkers and scientists who all unanimously agree on the fact we cannot prohibit our way out of the drug war. We can only regulate responsibly. Measure 80 will be addressed in the legislature in January when it passes in November. But the reality is it is a sound, proven model using the effective regulation techniques we've learned from decades of alcohol regulation. We cannot afford to go any more years with a false sense of prohibition here in Oregon, and I would ask you to support the measure.
Well, I thank both parties for the respectful way in which they deal with each other. As you know, as the moderator wasn't up here restraining fisticuffs. In fact, I demurred from even appearing. So thank you, gentlemen, for your offerings. Now, Representative Boone is here. I'm going to give each of these folks, since they're unopposed, are the opposing candidates here? We have each of these folks here because they're part of their district in Washington County. In the past, we've been criticized for excluding folks. For example, Mr. Barnes lives in part of Washington County. So I'm going to call Representative Boone, and you have 10 to 12 minutes. Do whatever you want to. You can speak the whole time. You can offer questions. It's up to you. And Mr. Barnes, you'll follow similarly.
Thank you, John, and thanks to the Washington County Forum of Public Affairs for hosting this forum and inviting me today. I'm going to read this because, and we use my glasses, which really don't work very well, so I have to have a little bit of, I looked at that handout there on the marijuana thing, and I could not quite get it, even with the glasses, so. I'm running for re-election for House District 32 because there's more to do to continue rebuilding Oregon's economy and getting Oregonians back to work. We need someone who will focus on common sense solutions and get our unemployed citizens back to work, and I would like to be that person. Senator Wayne Morse was an early role model for me as someone who put policy and personal integrity before politics. It is this philosophy that provides the basis for the work to offer help to people when they truly need it, and also works to prevent those situations that created the need in the first place whenever possible. Since I was elected in 2004, I have worked collaboratively and across the aisle in a bipartisan manner, joining with my colleagues to help Oregonians find solutions to the challenges that they have, as well as ways to improve opportunities to support themselves and their families. It's important to me to work hard to get things done for the people in my district as well as all Oregonians. For the entire time that I've been in the Oregon legislature, I've fought for Oregon businesses, passing laws to open up lending in our tough economic times, cutting red tape whenever possible, helping new and existing businesses to find funding and ways to grow. I've worked with many advocacy groups that provide services to our most vulnerable citizens. Many of the bills that I've sponsored over the years focus on creating jobs or new business opportunities. And some of these bills are multi-purpose in that they support the basic infrastructure of our industries and economic sectors at the same time. Several of these jobs bills assist in the development of renewable energy resources as the demand for more energy production continues to grow and as our renewable portfolio standard requirements come closer to the deadline. And that is 25% of has to be renewable energy, new renewable energy by the year 2025, which is closer than we think. I've worked hard to get our state spending under control. We've made huge strides in government efficiencies. The implementation of performance measures nearly a decade ago have proven to be successful in keeping operations as lean as possible while still delivering services to those who need them the most. And we will continue to look for savings wherever we can find them. A lot of these ideas come from our employees who are the frontline workers, and we listen to them carefully. My committee assignments have included natural resources, veterans affairs, energy and water policy, and emergency preparedness sectors. One of my highest priorities is for Oregon to be as prepared as possible for natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, storms, and fires. Currently, the report that required by a bill I sponsored, House Resolution 3, is being developed by a large group of professionals and citizens in several sectors, guided by the Oregon Seismic Safety Policy Advisory Council, for delivery to the 2013 legislature. This ambitious plan for resilience is considered a work in progress and is one of the first, if not only, such plans in the United States. It will likely call for the voter-supported initiative, and I believe it was in 2001, to seismically retrofit schools, hospitals, and other public buildings, creating hundreds of jobs at the same time. Senator Chuck Thompson from Hood River and I sponsored a bill that allows the donation of bycatch from our commercial fishing industry to food banks. This changes the wasteful practice of dumping the non-targeted species overboard when they're accidentally caught during commercial fishing operations. It's a win-win for all. Last session, Oregon joined Alaska, Washington, California, and Idaho as members of the Pacific Fisheries Legislative Task Force, and each state drafted memorials to the Congress and President asking for full funding of the U.S. Coast Guard. This action will result, and we passed ours unanimously here in Oregon. This action will result in a safer ocean environment for commercial and recreational fishers and boaters and the shipping industry, as well as keeping us protected from drug dealers and illegal fishing practices in the federal waters. If the U.S. Coast Guard stations are fully funded and equipped, we will realize faster response times for the rescues and more lives can be saved. I've continued my advocacy for veterans as they transition home from the wars. We've passed several bills in the last few years that make reintegration easier for our veterans. I've worked hard to protect Oregon Project Independence, a program that helps people stay in their homes while receiving services without which they would be forced to move into other accommodations, often against their will and at a much greater cost. In a true bipartisan effort, we created help for people who are about to lose their homes through foreclosure. We also address the high cost of health care through reforms that will incorporate prevention-oriented practices that save money and result in healthier citizens. I'm continuing my work supporting relief nurseries and other methods of preventing child abuse and neglect. And this is something I've worked on since the early 70s. I believe that money spent up front to prevent child abuse will save spending after the fact in treatment costs, which are at least 4 to 6 times more expensive as the prevention costs. I've also worked hard to prevent our children from entering the seedy world of human trafficking and helping those children already involved in it to escape and to get help. These are just some of the examples of my work during the time I've served in the legislature, and I respectfully ask the voters of House District 32 for their vote so I can continue my work for you in the House of Representatives. Thank you.
Hearing none.
I was speaking behind you, John. Would you outline for us exactly where your district is?
Okay, yeah.
Edges and the middle?
As best I can. And this will be the new district just approved through the redistricting process. Yeah. So all of Clatsop County, that's the easy part. Half of Tillamook County, the line is disputable, but somewhere below the city of Tillamook, and not including Netarts and Oceanside, but following 101 and then east into picking up Western Washington County, Gaston, up 47, not Forest Grove, but Banks. So it's a lovely drive, which I actually go that way I go west out of Salem when I'm there. And so I go through the district that way and have always gone through, either Dayton, Gaston, Banks, the Yamhill, all those. So I'm kind of used to it anyway. Now I need to get the lines drawn carefully in my mind. Yeah, Barbara, hi.
Hi, I'm Barbara Wilson, member of the front. Could you tell me what you know about climate change and what can the state of Oregon do to ameliorate the problem?
Well, that's a big one. Well, what I know is probably not the whole story, but what I know is basically from what I see with my own eyes, having flown for the last, I don't know how many years, over to Sweden so many times to see my family and friends, and watching as I do different times of the year, but the usual times of year when you see ice below and you don't see ice or you see it broken up, and that tells me a lot. And talking to people in the scientific sector about the issues that they are addressing with this. We just had a very, very long, hot, dry summer season here in Oregon, and fire danger was just on the edge. What the state can do is invest more in renewable energy sources, look at what we are a very low carbon producing state in any case, but we are working on some of these things. We're going to see some low carbon fuel bills come before us. We have a whole new 10-year energy plan, and I'm curious as that evolves how that's going to end up looking. There's some good things about it and some that I can't say they're bad, but they're unexplained, so I'm curious to see how these roll out. I will.
Will Hobbs, former member. Your prior to redistricting your district, I don't know if it included any Washington County or did.
It did, yes.
I know it significantly increased though since then. And your visibility here is actually quite low. And I was wondering, I assume that along the coast you have town halls and the like. How are you going to increase your visibility and learn what the what the concerns of your new constituents are?
Okay, well, I actually can address that first. During session, when I am in Salem, I stay there during the week. I come home on Friday nights. I buy my gas and groceries at Jim's, Thriftway, and Banks. Banks is in my district, so that's a weekly occasion for me. Senator Johnson and I held a town hall meeting in Gaston soon after we finished this last short session. It was sometime in March. I can't give you the exact date. But it was snowy because I remember going over the hill twice to get through to it. But that's what we do. I don't know how well you know me. I'm not a press hound, so there's that. I don't jump in front of the cameras whenever I can. I do hold town hall meetings and try to do it around the district. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Boone. We're going to proceed.
There's one more, I think. Want me to sit up here or no?
You can sit up here.
I'll sit.
Mr. Barnes has a right to spend as much time as he wants to. I also promised to share up a little time for ESPD, which I'll catch at the end of the Mr. Barnes' program. Come on up. You've got 12 minutes to spend any way you want to, answering questions or delivering a soliloquy as to why you're the best candidate. It's up to you.
Thanks, folks. I'd like to thank the forum for inviting me here today to address you folks, and I'll try to give you a brief snapshot of who I am and why I'm running and what I think I can do for us. Again, my name's Lou Barnes. I'm running for House District 31. The geographics of the district are a little bit west of Clackaday and Westport, extending down to Solvay's Island. And if you draw a vector back from those 2 points over to a little bit outside of North Plains, you pretty much enclose the district. The cities involve primarily Vernonia, Clackaday, Rainier, Scappoose, St. Helens, and obviously Solvay's Island is not a district, but that's the portion of Multnomah County that we're in. I grew up here in Oregon all but 2 years of my life. I moved here in 1951 with my dad, lived on the state prison grounds. My father was a deputy warden down there. We lived in Salem until moving to the Beaverton area in the mid-60s. At 17, I joined the United States Marine Corps, spent a tour in Vietnam in 1968 and 69. Got off active duty in 71 and out of the Corps in 1973. Subsequent to that period of time, I attended Portland State University. I went to work for Georgia Pacific Corporation here in Portland when it was headquartered here. I ended up as the controller for the Portland Division in international operations. In the late 70s, I went to work for the Zidell companies, and I held multiple positions there during a 9-year period. I was the vice president of Gulf Supply, of Tube Forgings of America, the executive vice president of Gulf Supply located in Houston, Texas, and the president of TFA Inc. In 1988, I formed my own company, Summit Manufacturing, which is located right over here in Hillsboro, Oregon, a little bit west of Aloha. What got me involved in running for public office happened about 5 years ago. As we're all aware of probably one of the worst recessions we've had since 1980, in 2008, I lost 40% of my revenue base. My top 3 accounts left the state. Believe me, that got my attention. I started paying a little bit more attention to what was going on down in Salem, and what really caught my eye was the amount of money the state was trying to increase their budget by, which was a 22% increase, a $14 billion number. Blew me away. I had no idea the amount of money that the state spent. It was going from $48 billion to $62 billion after I just laid off over a dozen employees. Everybody took a 15% pay cut, and not to mention what I went to. I'll stop there because I get a little emotional about that when I find out people aren't really looking at what creates this society that we have. I'm going to move forward to a couple of things that I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years. Some of the things, I'm pretty sure that most of you here are very engaged politically, else you wouldn't be here today. But you're aware that we have anywhere between a 30 to 50% dropout rate in our K through 12 educational system. We've got 22% of Oregonians on food stamps. We've got over 700,000 people on the Oregon Health Plan. Are those good things? Are those good things? Anybody? Obviously, they can say, no, that isn't a good thing. We do have people in this society that need our help. We have people that through physical or mental handicap are not able to support themselves. We need to help those people on a permanent basis. The rest of the folks, though, need a different kind of helping hand, and I know you've heard it before. It's a hand up, not a hand out. I've done that my whole life. I've been poor. Best thing that ever happened to me. It taught me how to make a living. It taught me to look in the mirror. It taught me to fess up to the mistakes that I've made and don't make them again. And then help other people with that same, the things that I've learned in my life. I think that what we're dealing with today, I'm looking at this as a business person, I deal with facts. And I try to get as many facts in front of me so that I can deal with the situation that we're trying to address in a legitimate fashion, not attempt to address the symptom. And that's what we do. Let's throw more money at education. Let's get more people on food stamps or on the Oregon Health Plan. We even advertise to do that. It would be my objective to get less people on those programs and more people productive in society, feeling the same self-worth that all of us do when we have a job, when we're producing. Those things I think are common to everybody. We've gotten off track somewhere from the founding principles of this country. Self-reliance, individual responsibility and accountability, fiscal responsibility, limited government. Those things created this great nation. And we have forever, at least the last 120 years, negotiated our way away from those founding principles. If we can get ourselves back on track, stand up for what we truly believe that we know is going to get us to the top of that hill, we can get there. What I hear politicians telling everybody today is, we'll make it painless. We'll take care of you. What do you need, Sheriff? We'll take care of you. I'm sorry, but there's going to be pain. That's life. Life isn't fair. But we can help each other by giving each other self-worth to get us from here to here to here. I've done it my whole life. I've done it with my employees, and we can do it with this state. With that, I respectfully ask for anyone that lives in the district of House District 31 for your vote. Thank you very much.
This question should be directed at either or both, if you want to.
Sure.
Harry Wooding, board member, and you two are not running against each other. Okay, I've got that straight now. You're at Columbia County, she's Plaza. My question really goes to Representative Boone. And that is, we've had an unusual situation already in the last 2 years where the House of Representatives is evenly split between two parties. And a lot of people think it was a very productive session. The system really kind of worked with the two co-speakers. My understanding is on the Democratic side that the House co-speaker seeking to go to the House of Lords, is that right? They were in the Senate, I'm referring to.
The House of Lords.
Okay. Two players in the Senate. And as I understand it, there's a representative from Portland who's in line to be the Democratic choice for speaker. And my question is the spirit of bipartisanship required by the 30-30 split, are we going to continue to see something like that as we're moving back to the old system? We're in charge, you're not, this is the way it's going to be done.
Well, hopefully not, Harry. Hopefully not. The 30-30 split, I thought, worked very well in terms of getting things done that were not controversial. And that was part of we saw a lot of the bills that had been introduced pushed aside because they would have been controversial. So hopefully, and I try to be optimistic about this, that people have learned that we can get along, we can work together, and we take our party hats off when we go into the Capitol during session to get things done, working across the aisle with our colleagues to do that. And that's what I do. That's my approach. And I try to encourage my caucus members to do the same. I've worked every bill that I've ever introduced, I have to say, except for maybe two that were, and these were specifically addressed from the constituency, and they just wanted their name on it. And so, but all of them I try to make bipartisan, and I try to do bicameral. So I try to have a Republican House member and with me, and then a Democratic and Republican Senate member, so that we hit all the caucuses and try to work together. But I think that what we went through showed that we could do it, and hopefully, regardless of who's in charge, or if it's a split again, that we can move forward.
Obviously, having a House split 30-30, you have no option. You have two people that head up each committee. You have two co-speakers. Nothing got out of committee unless each of those co-chairs allowed it to go through the committee and to the floor. I have a sense, my gut feel is whoever achieves a majority, they will basically have their own agenda, whether that is a Republican or a Democrat. It's been that way in the past, and I don't see that changing in the future. I would hope that we have people that will be able to look at the issues and look at the facts and then make a determination on which way to vote on specific issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Ms. Boone, I promised to share up a little ESPD time. He's got it now.
ESPN does sound more fun. As the Washington County Sheriff, I would just urge voters who live in the urban unincorporated area to vote yes on Measure 34-198. That's provided for the last 24 years half of the police services to communities like Aloha, Reedville, Bethany, Rock Creek, Claremont, Raleigh Hills, Cedar Hills, Bethany, Metzger, Garden Home, parts of Bull Mountain. Really, it continues existing services. What I like to say is the public safety tomorrow in the district means supporting ESPD today. So thank you.
That concludes our program for today. Norm Ritchie is going to explain the ballot measure 81, the salmon thing. It's allegedly non-controversial, but apparently it's become a little bit controversial. The governor had a plan, so we're actually going to invite Salmon for All to present a countervailing view. Mr. Ritchie will be here. We'll have the House districts as usual. But at this point in time, we're going to sign off. And again, thank you for being here, and thank you for your attendance. And I thank all the folks who are here today for their wonderful professional and benign attitude towards the issues and each other. Thank you.